I am delighted to introduce today's presenters. Dr. Joanna Palmer is the Dean of Psychology Programs for Online and the Center for Graduate Studies and has been with Baker College since 2006. She believes the FGEP is a great evaluation tool for administrators as well as faculty who appreciate the one-on-one time with their dean. Dr. Palmer is excited about having the process in place for a couple of years as she is able to see the growth part of the process that can occur after the initial evaluation. Teresa Cowan is the Director of Health Sciences for the Auburn Hills campus and has also been with Baker College since 2006. In using the faculty growth and evaluation process, she has found that the model is fair and eliminates bias. Teresa is excited about presenting today because she has confidence in the process of discovering faculty strengths and opportunities as a way to assist them in becoming better instructors. And with that, what I would like to do is pass the, I don't have my function to pass the session. Lisa?
I apologize. Maybe I've interrupted something here.
No, I think maybe you've taken over. I just need you to pass the ball to Joanna.
Oh, I wonder how that happened.
You did it. All right, so what I'm going to do is bring the PowerPoint up on my screen to share with you all. So if you can let me know when you can see it, that would be good.
Okay, we see your...
You can see it. So with that, I'm going to progress through the slides, and Teresa's going to go ahead and get us started.
Good morning. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Joanna, on the next screen, please. Oh, we want to go over the agenda first? Okay. I want to start off this morning by going over the objectives for the session. We plan to review goals and the purpose of the evaluation process, discuss how to write a precise and meaningful evaluation summary form, practice analyzing observations, and finally, practice prioritizing areas of strengths and opportunities for improvement. Next. We'll begin by reviewing the goals of the Faculty Growth and Evaluation Process, or FGEP. The goal is to support continuous improvement of quality teaching and learning, to assist faculty with providing authentic experiences for students, focus on student learning and evidence of student learning, engage faculty in best practices, use multiple sources of data for faculty growth and development, and finally, engage faculty in deep conversations on quality teaching and learning. The purpose of the evaluation in the faculty growth and evaluation process is to provide a structured and consistent process that encourages continuous growth in faculty instruction. It is also to provide a platform for coaching conversations between evaluators and faculty, and to create a shared plan of continuous improvement for faculty with clarified identifying goals. What else does the evaluation part of the process do? Either the writing of the evaluation of the evaluator's part or as a result of the evaluation conference. Joanna?
Yeah, so I think before we transition to the next slide is what do you all think about these kind of last two questions here? All of the material that Teresa reviewed came from the initial FG&E training materials that we received. And sometimes I think in the process of getting into the day-to-day of doing the evaluations, we sometimes lose sight of the purpose, which was clearly laid out for us in the beginning to focus on continuous improvement and coaching and all of those things. But beyond those things, what else have you found the evaluation part of the process to do when you're working with faculty? Either when you're writing up their evaluation or when you're talking with them. What are some of the benefits you've seen from the evaluation process? You know, Lisa, people can talk if they have phone access. That's fine. I saw the question from Lisa.
Yes.
One thing that I think, this is Lisa, one thing that I think in terms of actually, whether it's the post-evaluation conference and you're engaging in that conversation or you're actually writing it up, I think it gives you the opportunity as an evaluator to really look at perhaps a holistic understanding or gain a holistic understanding of the strengths and opportunities within your faculty. So if I did, 10 observations last quarter in the fall, it gives me a sense of, okay, of the 10 that I did, where do people fall, and are there any similarities or distinct differences among my faculty? And it allows me an opportunity to be able to say, hey, you know what, we're kind of all in the same place, or we're all over the board. And it makes me think about planning conversations that we can have collectively as a program group.
Okay.
I think that's good. And I saw some notes, too, about building relationships and so forth, too, which Teresa and I are going to get into. So.
Yeah.
And I think the reason we wanted to start with this was to kind of reflect on what we've had when we did our initial training to kind of ground where we're going to go today. But today, getting more specific into that evaluation process. There's been other training sessions on other parts of the FG and EMP, but we know when we go to do an observation and when we collect all the data for the observation that we have a lot of information, and we then need to figure out how to get all that information into a proper and beneficial evaluation summary. So one of the things that we found were some common pitfalls and challenges. And so we looked out to see, just in the evaluation process, what are some common pitfalls and challenges, not just when evaluating faculty, but when doing evaluations in general. And so some of the key common challenges that popped up were that evaluators are not trained. And this is an area where I feel like Baker has done our due diligence, and we had the initial training, we have these initial sessions, so we're really making sure that this doesn't become a challenge for our organization, that we're working to really train and continuously improve our evaluators. Likewise, evaluators sometimes are not supported by solid processes and systems. They're told to evaluate the people that work for them, but they're not really given some clear guidelines and expectations and assistance with that. And again, I feel like this is another area where Baker has done a really nice job by pulling together the entire FG-EMP process before giving it to us, which I think was a huge benefit. Another one that popped up that I thought was interesting was that sometimes employees are surprised by the evaluation. So we definitely built that into our process as well to avoid that pitfall. And then the last item is that evaluators are not prepared for the individual evaluation. This one, to me, is outside of the Baker system as a whole. There's a lot of things we can do as a system to support evaluators, to make sure there's training, to build processes in. But the last item, evaluators are not prepared, is more of the individual evaluator. Not only have they partaken in some of the extra training and expertise and lessons learned during sessions such as this, but also are they preparing, truly preparing for that individual evaluation. So that's the area we're going to focus on today, because that's the area that we can individually affect ourselves. So when we look at a little more into the writing of the evaluation, or the material that gets presented to the faculty member or even to the school in the form of the summary form, there's some additional things that occur during the actual process of getting all of the material into a written format. Sometimes what happens is we find that evaluators do not evaluate employees accurately. And this, again, is across the board for all types of organizations. And so on the screen, you can see a few different types of things that can occur when we are evaluating people. And these are things we want to watch out for, because we don't want them to be a pitfall or a challenge, because what will happen is when we get to the conference with the faculty, it will affect the relationship we build with the faculty and can cause some negative effects from the evaluation process, which we want to avoid. But some of these things, just so that you know what they are: recency effect, that would be you base the evaluation primarily on an actual recent event, either positive or negative, and you don't really have due diligence in collecting all of the information through observations, through student evaluations, through other interactions you've had with the faculty throughout the year, that you just use one primary interaction. So if something negative occurred in a class and there were student complaints and you did the evaluation based on that and the evaluation was colored by that single incident, that would be recency effect. Contrast effect is where you have this one is the easy one and we have to watch out for. You have a really great faculty member. You have a faculty member who's exemplary and you want all of your faculty to strive to be that person. So you compare other faculty to that person. Or you have somebody who needs improvement in several areas, and when you see somebody who's doing slightly better, you again compare. So we want to try to avoid comparing and contrasting the actual people versus the skills and the behaviors that we want exemplary faculty to exhibit. Leniency bias and strictness bias kind of go together. They're just the opposite ends of the spectrum. Leniency bias would be that we are too lenient with our scores. Maybe we don't want to tell people that they're not doing well or that they need to improve. So we give not so great people mediocre scores, we give mediocre people great scores. And so we see a lot of meets and exceeds, but we don't want to give people a does not meet rating. Strictness bias is the other way around. Like we hold that exceeds item as, you know, a golden trophy and nobody is going to be able to achieve it. And what we find is then everybody kind of meets or does not meet, and we're too strict with the exceeds, that we really need to think about the definitions the school has given us for each of the ratings and the behaviors that we're looking for. Central tendency is we put everyone in the middle. Most everyone gets meets, and we don't like to go either way. And then personal bias is, again, somewhat like recency in that there's something affecting your judgment of that person, either something you know about them outside of the class, an interaction they've had with you, something that's just biasing your particular perspective of what you're seeing. So those are some things we want to watch out for, and it can be very easy, I think, to fall into some of those categories. So a couple other things before we move on, just making sure that we're looking at performance and not evaluation or not attitude. When we try to evaluate attitude, and we put that into the language, which we'll show you in a few minutes, it becomes really sticky. It puts faculty on the defensive for sure. We don't want to have personal judgments. We want to leave the I out of our evaluations. And language is too vague, which is going to be a key part of what we talk about. So on that note, and looking at the different things that can become roadblocks to us when we're doing an evaluation, how do you overcome some of these challenges? What do you do to ensure that you are accurately evaluating the employees that you're looking at? Okay, so Bill puts, he asks for some more information, right? Anything else? Okay. So one of the things we can do, which is the focus of what Teresa and I are going to talk about primarily today, and then we're going to work through some case examples and really get you to help us out by providing some additional information, is as we move from that observation where we've collected all of this data and we have student eval reports and we have our observation of the class and whatever else it is that we've collected along the way, then we need to write it up. And so choosing our words carefully becomes a big part of this, not only when we're talking to the faculty member in the conference, but when we're writing up the evaluation as well. So some things to consider when we're choosing our words, and some of this is obvious, but it's good to just reflect and remember, be mindful of it, is that we want to balance between strengths and opportunities. As Teresa said, in the introduction for Teresa, Allison mentioned, the idea of strengths and opportunities, and that's key in our process, that when we are evaluating faculty in the 4 categories on the evaluation summary form, we're looking for both strengths and opportunities, and we want to try to balance those out. The language needs to support discussion. That is the whole purpose of the evaluation, is to build a relationship that we can coach and help continuously improve. So using the word and instead of but. An example would be that, you know, I could easily say she asks the class questions, but she doesn't employ any other strategies. But if we just flip it a little bit and we say she asks the student questions, and there's an opportunity for her to integrate some additional strategies, such as small group activities and et cetera. Just changing one word in our sentence changes the entire tone of what we're delivering to the faculty as far as what we've observed. So trying to think of what they can be doing and thinking about carefully reading through what we write to look for these sort of things so that we can try to flip it. And one of the things I personally do when I'm doing the evaluation summary is I try to mimic best practices. I'm trying to coach and help them give good feedback to students, and I mimic that in my evaluation summary. So I want to talk about what they did well. I want to identify gaps or missing items in the best way I can so that it remains kind of positive as an idea of continuous improvement. So again, this is just another slide with a little bit more detail. So we're going to use objective measurement-oriented language. We're going to avoid being vague, such as we don't want to say, you know, the faculty member had a good use of class time is extremely vague versus just taking a moment to think about, well, what does it mean by having good class time? So we could say the faculty planned class time well to engage students with multiple activities to include. So we're giving some detail there. Just giving a rating is not enough, and that's built into our process. We are expected to provide some commentary and some evidence for how we came to our conclusion of meets, does not meet, or exceeds. And we're trying to stick to the facts. I think that's a given one, but it's also a good one to remember when we're doing our write-ups. We want to give that faculty member a good sense of what it is that they did. So again, we do that by using that objective language and avoiding kind of vague, open-ended items. So Teresa.
Thank you, Joanna. We're going to use some of Joanna's examples in a few minutes. But as we explore our words, we want to keep in mind that our faculty members, they are experts in their field, and you are expert in academia and teaching. So in doing so, for the evaluation component, for the summary evaluation, we want to use our words carefully. And what we did this time was take Bloom's taxonomy, the evaluation component, and expand it on that. For example, select appropriate terminology that's meaningful and objective. Justify your recommendations with supportive educational literature. Decide your evaluation goals from previous observations, and I'm pretty certain you all know that observation is before the evaluation. So we want to take time to look at the observation component and write down some goals before we go in to see exactly what we're looking for. Prioritize evidence of observation from great to challenging. When speaking to our faculty member, keep in mind they can be very sensitive. So the first thing that we want to do is that we want to prioritize what we saw that was very great. Then we want to take that information and bring it to some things that needs improvement or challenging. We want to recommend the use of LCIs or best practices. We want to discuss opportunities for leading best practices, professional development. Give them an opportunity. If you see something good in our classroom, say to them, could you do professional development on this and perhaps share with your colleagues? Assess previous student evaluation with current evaluation for consistency, improvement, and recommendation. Joanna and I had a conversation about this. Sometimes you may have just that one bad class. And to judge them just on this one evaluation, the student evaluation, I don't believe that's fair. So what we decided to do was take some previous evaluations and see whether or not there was some consistency, some improvement, and then we can talk about recommendations. Finally, evaluate the lesson with the student learning outcomes and course syllabus in hand. Next one, Joanna. So these are some examples we were talking about when we summarize an evaluation. We can write like this. Nancy was well prepared for class and developed good activities to keep the students engaged during the class. We really didn't specify what Nancy was doing in the classroom. Or we could write it like this. The lesson plan for the class had several activities related to the student learning outcomes that kept students engaged the entire class. Nancy developed multiple discussion questions grounded in the following basic practices: Socratic questioning, scaffolding, learning through replies to student response, facilitation of application of content to real-life scenarios. Next example. For Scott, we could write Scott like this. Scott had a good use of lecture, though lacked other types of learning activities. Or we could write like this. Scott's primary teaching strategy in the observed class was lecture. His lecture was detailed. It included relevant topics of information and had some allowance for student questioning. One area of opportunity for Scott is to integrate multiple teaching strategies within his class time. In addition to lecture, consider the use of other types of activities that can promote active learning, such as small group activities, learner-led, mini lectures, question and answer sessions, problem solving, and application activities. Recommend Scott review Teaching Strategies Handbook from the AIMS training to identify strategies he can try in the future. Next. We can write a summary like this. Bob did not demonstrate evidence of significant formative feedback in his class on a graded written assignment. Or we can write like this. Bob has opportunities to increase the use of formative feedback both within his class time discussion and on written work returned to students. Suggest strategies to include redirecting students who got off track, clarifying misconceptions presented by the students, and ask probing questions to push learning further. Written feedback can include a balance of comments related to what was done well, what was missing, as well as what could be done differently in the future assignments to improve. When using the evaluation to foster the relationship with the faculty, regardless of the rating of the category, the purpose remains focused on coaching, open up in a conversation, and encourage continual growth. Good work relationship can be fostered by how we present information in our evaluation summary. Draft your evaluation prior to the conference, but be willing to add new information that is relevant as a result of the conference before finalizing. Joanna and I had a conversation about when we finalize our evaluation, sometimes we do a pre-writing, and then when we talk to our faculty members, sometimes we get some clarity. So be willing to change some things in your pre-writing or your draft before you finalize. Next, Joanna.
Okay, so now we've given you some information and some background. We've given you some common pitfalls and challenges on things that can occur when we're writing, and we've given you some examples. And some things to, I think, note from the examples are sometimes we're trying to be concise. We do want to be concise, but we want to be concise yet specific. So sometimes we can be too concise to the detriment of the process as far as coaching and being specific and providing those evidence-based behaviors. So we do want to be concise, but we do want to be specific. So it ends up being a little bit longer than some of the examples of not so great comments. So it's all about balance. So what we're going to do is we're going to now go through a couple of case considerations that we've come up with. One is set up more like an on the ground, like you went into the class and you did an observation of the in-class time. And the other is looking more from the online standpoint, but looking at if you go through somebody's Blackboard shell and see how that looks as far as what they're doing in that portion of the class as well. So one thing that we haven't touched upon just to reflect before we go into this is where we get the data and information for evaluations, that we do have an observation of faculty. On ground, we're going into the classrooms and we're really looking at what the faculty member is doing in that real time with the student. And we may do this more than once, as Teresa said. And the other side for online is to look through what they're doing in the online Blackboard classroom and how they're interacting with students and what they're choosing to do. So those are the observations. We also have our operational responsibilities. That's part of our evaluation summary form, so we always have that handy to go through that. And sometimes by going through the operational responsibilities, we can identify things where there's strengths and issues or opportunities there as well. We look at the student evaluations of faculty, and we look at we have our past interactions with the faculty as far as our discussions with them related to how they teach and what they teach and challenges they've overcome and so forth. We have their course summary and reflection forms. These are the items that we give to them ahead of time so that they can give us their voice in the evaluation. You know, as Teresa said, we're just going into the class, we see a snapshot of time, and it's not always a comprehensive reflection of what they do. So that course summary and reflection form that we give them ahead of time really allows them to think about it and present what do they want the evaluator to know that they do, and what are their own areas of strengths and areas of opportunities based on their own reflections. And then we also have the prior evaluation summaries. If this is a secondary or tertiary evaluation of the faculty, we might have a prior goals, professional growth plan for them that we can look at so that we can then build the next evaluation on that, because at that point we wouldn't be starting over, we'd be building kind of on what we did before. So this is a lot of different ways we get information. You are all familiar with this, but we're putting it up here just because we're going to lead into some case scenarios. So this is the format for our evaluation summary form. And again, we can see we have our 4 categories. We pick our rating, but like we said, for best practices, we also have to then support our rating. And how we're going to support that rating while also fostering that relationship with the faculty that we're, you know, collaborating with them on helping them improve is we're going to work on identifying strengths and opportunities. Sometimes, like in our examples, they're woven together. You know, some of the examples that Teresa presented had the strengths and opportunities kind of woven together into a passage. And I've seen evaluation forms come in that way. And sometimes it's nice to just separate them out as well, and identify the strengths and then identify the opportunities. So there's a couple options there. So let's go ahead and get started on a case. I am going to play around with my screen for just a second. I just want to see if I can get the chat feature. I can't see the chat, so I'm just going to see if we can do that really quick. But I don't think I'm going to. I see what I did. All right, so we're going to go ahead and go from current slide, and if anything, Allison, comes up in the chat, if you could just let us know, because I can't see it, because I closed out a window.
Yep. Okay.
All right.
Because we're going to need the chat feature right now for this faculty observation. It is on ground. And I want us to take a look at the observation notes. And we're going to take these notes, and we're going to create a summary on the evaluation. So these are some notes that was just jotted down for a particular teacher. Class starts at 9. Teacher greeted the students, passed around PowerPoints, attendance sheet. This particular teacher wrote an agenda on the board. And what she wanted to do was to review the previous lesson, probe the students' knowledge of previous concepts, questions. She left the topic up for questions, discussion questions, homework, or any concerns before she started today's lesson, which was Chapter 3, Input and Data on the Calendar. And finally, she was going to wrap up, and then she was going to leave room for questioning. Her lesson plan followed the course syllabus. She began her lesson by introducing key concepts as it relates to the topic. She lectured for 45 minutes. She walked around the room while she was lecturing. The students were writing notes. They were allowed to pose questions. For clarity, the room was an arrangement, a traditional arrangement where the desks and chairs are in a row. The teacher uses Blackboard as a course management tool, and she records students' attendance and final grades in a timely manner. She utilizes the notice of concerns when appropriate. So what we want to do right now is we need some chat from you, because we want to look at the planning and development of this particular teacher. Did she exceed, meet, or does not meet the criteria for planning and preparation? For the terminology for planning and preparation, it encompasses the instructional, design, and assessment of strategies aligned with the student learning outcomes. If she exceeded, the teacher demonstrated a seamless transition of planned instruction to keep the students engaged in the learning process. The instructor connected the learning beyond the content of the course to the program and to the profession. Or did she meet? Did she demonstrate preparation through managing instructional time, effective and adjusting instruction based on the student feedback? The instructor, did she transition and connect between topics within the lesson and within the course? Or finally, did she not meet? The instructor does not demonstrate evidence of cohort planning for maximizing instructional time. At this time, I need your feedback on how would you rate this instructor on planning and preparation. Did she exceed, meet, or does not meet when we talk about the summary? We're just waiting on feedback now. So if you can see the chat, oh, thank you, Harold.
You're welcome.
Amy, thank you. Anybody else? Okay, thanks, Charles. Brandon met. And I agree with you all. In this case, I said she met. She provided opportunities to practice listening skills and demonstrate comprehension. She transitioned smoothly between topics. She provided an opportunity for the students to feedback in classroom, and she aligned this instruction to the student learning outcomes because we talked about her course syllabus. What would you recommend for her to do in her planning? This is when we talk about challenges now. Is there anything she could do a little differently? What would you recommend for her to get to that exceed component? I know you're typing. Joanna and I just can't see the screen. Okay. Thank you. Use current events to trigger discussion. Thank you, Cindy. These are just recommendations. Thank you so much. Lisa,
yes,
create opportunities for students. Yes. Thank you. So let's move to the next category for the learning environment. The terminology reads, encompass the organization, structure, and atmosphere of respect, collaboration, and intellectual curiosity that foster successful learning. Did she exceed, did she meet, or does not meet? When she exceeds, she created an environment for the student to expand their personal, academic, and professional horizon, embrace multiple viewpoints, and display a passion for learning. Or did she meet? Did she encourage tolerance, inquiry, and did she appreciate diversity? Did she promote a positive learning environment through the establishment of routines and classroom process, or does she not meet? Does she needs to adhere to routine of classroom process that provides structure necessary to promote a positive learning environment. She's not actively encouraging tolerance or inquiry or comprehension of diversity at all. So did she meet, exceed, or does not meet when it comes to the learning environment? Thank you, Harold. She met. Thank you, Cindy. She met. Thank you, Shannon. She meets. Thank you, and I would agree with that. What can we recommend for this teacher to do for the learning environment? She has a routine, but we want to extend on something. We want to push her a little differently. Sometimes teachers get so comfortable in their own zone and afraid to branch out. So what would you recommend for her to do in this learning environment? Thank you, Phyllis. Oh, thank you, reflections. Break lectures into smaller increments. Thank you, Harold. Integrated variety. Thank you, Shannon. So finally, we'll talk about the learning facilitation. It encompasses the implementation of structural strategies that promote student learning. For the exceed category, she challenged the students to develop and apply the problem solving and critical thinking. Did she provide a variety of strategies to encourage the students in a structural process? Did she hold the students accountable for the learning outcomes and assessments as self-reflection? Or did she not meet? She needs to improve some strategies to engage the student learning. What would you say for the learning facilitation? There's no evidence of accountability. She met? Okay. Based on this, no, she did not meet. It was a lecture-driven one only. She was the only one talking. and her students were recording. What would you recommend for this instructor to do? Some of y'all wrote down some things earlier, such as formative assessment, small group activities, provide some formative assessment. Very good. Thank you, Cindy. These are just examples of an on-ground faculty evaluation that we will talk to her at the end of the conference. We'll have a conversation before we finalize the evaluation and talk to her about rooms of improvement. I do thank you for your feedback, and we move to Joanna with the on-ground component.
Thanks, Teresa. And I think, too, just before we move on, the comments, thanks, the feedback was really, the interaction was really nice there, so appreciating that.
I do appreciate that.
Yeah, and I saw a couple comments, like Bill mentioned, you know, it's hard to say based on this information.
That's true, too, Bill.
Yeah, and I think it's a good reflection back to where we were talking before, that this is a snapshot, right? And so as a result of doing this, and Teresa's beautifully laid out notes from her observation, which you're going to see mine in a second, and they're not so pretty, that it comes up with questions, right? And that's why we, you know, Teresa mentioned that we're going to talk with the faculty member, that she lectured for 45 minutes in this class, but it might prompt me to ask her, what else does she do in other types of class, or why did she choose lecture for this particular topic and not something else? And so it opens up that conversation, which is part of building that relationship. So I think it's a great example of how we can actually tell quite a bit from the notes. And I think in almost all cases, I always have some more questions for the faculty to answer while we're talking, you know, so that's a great example. So now we're going to move on to another example. And the example I gave, just because I work within the online campus, those are the folks I evaluate. So I'm going to share some observation notes that I've taken on a faculty member. And so, like I said, it's different. There's a lot of information to take in, and it looks a little different. Within an on-ground observation, you can sit in the class in real time and kind of takes notes in order as Teresa presented it. Here's the beginning of the class and what she did, and here's what she did throughout the middle, and here's how she wrapped up. And you get that nice snapshot. When you're looking at a Blackboard shell, so this becomes relevant not only to the online evaluators, but also on-ground faculty who now all have a Blackboard shell component with a discussion board and those sort of things. It's different because it's asynchronous. We can see the whole thing. When I go to evaluate a faculty member, I can see from day one to the final day of class all at once, and it's a huge amount of information. But like Teresa organized her notes, you have to find a way to organize your notes. And that would be a recommendation as far as how to move from observation to the evaluation summary, is figure out how you can organize your notes so that they will work for you when you get to the end point where you need to write up that summary passage and put it on the evaluation summary form. For me, what I do is in the left column, I have the various areas of the course or major areas from the evaluation that within a Blackboard shell, they have announcements, there's a faculty profile, there's discussion boards, there's the grade book, and then over time I've added a few other things. And again, some people may choose to organize this completely differently. But with learning environment, because it's all over the course, I think I put that on my note form so I can try to jot down evidence. And then as I poke through the course, I start filling out the form. It does not go in order because I work my way through the course, and if I see an example of nice tone or something that's contributing to the positive learning environment, I put it in there. If I see something that's really good on the discussion board, I put it in that box. So what I want you to do is just take a look through this. So briefly read through the area, and this is the observation I've made for a faculty member. And because of the way my brain works, I also note suggestions right while I'm doing the observation. If I note something is going on and I think of something that could be done to improve it, I have to put it on my note form or I will forget it. So just take a look through this. And then once you read through it, why don't you add what you think one of this faculty member's biggest strengths is, or a couple areas you would want to focus on as area of strengths, and what are a couple areas you might focus on as areas of opportunity? Because again, it's a lot of information and we have to cull it down. So go ahead and type in, okay, so some are coming in. One opportunity maybe and one strength or two, and then Teresa or Lisa, if you can kind of read what's coming through chat, just because my chat window disappeared.
Biggest opportunity to use, okay.
Discussion board best
practices. Yeah, we went through real quick.
Allison, can you read some of the comments that are coming in?
Sure. Opportunity database questioning or engagement techniques.
Sense of learning.
Strength, set up learning environment and statements.
Okay. I thought improved feedback with grading would be an area, an opportunity for this faculty member.
Mm-hmm. State expectations. Lead discussion board without dominating it would be a strength.
Mm-hmm.
Provide a rubric. Find more resources for them to give feedback.
Okay. And so I think that seems like some good things. And again, the way I lay out my observation form here, I was thinking about just taking all the suggestion column off, but then it wasn't really a reflection of kind of how I take the observation notes and move it into the summary, is because it all happens at the same time. As we are doing our observing, we are also thinking about things that we're noting things they're doing well, but we're also identifying gaps that we want to bring up with them. So that's why I chose to post it this way. One thing to note, you'll note in my notes, the instructors don't see this. No one else really sees this. You're the only people who have ever seen this, ever, besides myself. The notes are not written in the language that we talked about because I try to, as I'm going through the course, I just note things, that there were no substantial posts, there were no resources, there was no formative feedback. However, I'm not going to say that I'm not going to present it that way to the faculty member. We're going to talk about the lack of feedback and, you know, the brevity of the posts and those sort of things. But that's where taking all of those things we talked about at the beginning and the examples we gave comes into play. We have to think about how we're going to present this to the faculty member to achieve the outcome we want. The outcome we want is for them to, you know, join with us in the spirit of continuous improvement, right? That we want them to have the information they need to get better, but also the motivation to get better. So that's key when we move on to the actual write-up of the information. The other thing I just did, the color coding thing, is not actually on my version of the notes, but it's just how I organize different things. What leads to a positive learning environment in an online class? Some of the things are, you know, does the instructor welcome the students to class? Do they answer questions promptly? How do they answer questions? Do students seem to get frustrated? Some of those sort of things. I try to tie the behaviors to something that's kind of intangible, an environment. So that's just what the color coding is, just so that people can see how I organize all of this information from the observation notes and then try to get it into an observation or an evaluation summary form that's not 14 pages long, right? So based on this information, like Teresa did, what might you give them what might you give this faculty member for a planning and prep? You know, how is her planning and preparation, transitions, and those sort of things?
So did she meet, exceed, or does not meet for planning and preparation?
Good. Thanks, Teresa.
Thank you, Shannon.
Meet.
Thank you. Thank you, Cindy.
Okay, what about for professional expertise? And with professional expertise, we are looking at how well the faculty member exemplifies expertise of the subject matter, but also how well they connect the learning to real life, to the student future careers, and so forth. How might you rate the professional expertise? I saw one for does not meet.
I think this could be an area of questioning for her. Thank you, Lisa. Is that we could, during the evaluation component, we can talk to her about this. These are questions that we can have for her.
And that's exactly what I did. So that's a good point. What about? And I'm going to show you what what I wrote up about the person. What about learning environment? When we look at learning environment online, we don't have the luxury of seeing how they set up the chairs in the classroom. That's not a factor, or how they're interacting in real time, kind of with the instructor. In Teresa's notes, she had that the instructor was walking around and making contact with the students. Environment online, we're looking at how is the overall classroom set up? Do students seem confused in what they need to do and where they need to go? But also in how the instructor presents and makes a connection with the student. The other part of learning environment is, does it become a collaborative environment where students feel like they can ask questions and they're getting answers and that sort of thing. So how would you rate learning environment?
Thank you, Brandon. Thank you, Kim.
So people kind of going with meets for learning environment. All right, and last one before I show you kind of what happened as a result of this process would be learning facilitation. So again, we're looking at how the instructor, what strategies does the instructor use to teach? Do they maximize class time? How are they continuing kind of the learning process through the type of feedback and the timeliness of the feedback and all of that? How would you rate learning facilitation for this particular faculty as far as meets, does not meet, exceeds? Okay, so got a probably meets, question mark, meets, right? So there's some gray area there. It's not really clear from the notes. Brandon would want more information. Maybe almost meets, that's good. So that's it exactly. And so what I want to do is, so we have time for questions as well, is, again, there's a lot of information here, right? And then that leads to discussion, and we need to figure out kind of how to rate this person based on the information we've seen, and then hopefully finalizing it once we have the discussion. So what's interesting for the first item, for planning and prep, based on these notes, it came across from you all, just from a brief interaction with the notes, that she might meet planning and preparation. But the interesting thing is she actually did not meet planning and preparation, but for a couple reasons. Now, I changed the name to me, but it's not me. But I didn't want to have anyone else's name in there in case somebody was in the session. So the reason that the does not meet rating was given here was because although she has some announcements and some good things set up, which I highlighted in the strengths, the instructor actually was lacking a few key pieces that really would get her up to that meets category. She didn't have any transitional content in the course at all, as far as weekly transitional announcements or anything like that. And the other thing, in the discussion board, there were no posts beyond what was already in the course curriculum. She added no content to the course as far as start of the week discussion activities or resources or anything to get the students started. They had an assignment due on Saturday that they had to post in the discussion board, and she just went with that. So she did nothing on Thursday or Friday to set up the week or to do anything beyond what was in the course curriculum. So that was the reason that she didn't get the kind of a meets and planning and preparation. But you can also see how I tried to work to propose that to her. I use the word suggest a lot, I find, that I suggest that she incorporate weekly transition announcements. We discussed during the conference that she actually was unaware that she could create additional prompts to put in the discussion board. So that right there cleared up why the behavior was happening. And I had no doubts that if I look in her class today, that she would at least be at a meets for this category. And so it was a good example of how the conference provided information that was important to note on the evaluation form. It wasn't that she just was choosing not to do a behavior that would be expected. She didn't know that she was supposed to be doing it. So that was why I wanted to include this particular example. For professional expertise, she did meet and we talked about it during the session. What ended up happening was for this particular class that I observed was general psych, and it was a little harder for her to tie that to her workplace experience, her experience being in the field as a therapist. So we talked about examples that she provided examples that if she was teaching abnormal psych or some other courses that were more directly related to her field, how she incorporates that in. So I did have confidence that she does have professional expertise and she does bring that in when it's necessary. And we talked about some ways to do that even within the course that she was observed in. And so you can see here that, again, trying to really focus on balancing strengths and opportunities as much as possible and wording those opportunities in a way that opens up a discussion and benefits the faculty. For learning environment, again, she got a rating of meets, which most of you also had indicated in your feedback when I asked the question a little bit earlier. There were a lot of things that she did really well to set up a positive learning environment, including, being interactive in the class, that she answers questions, that grades were returned promptly, and all of those things. And then looking at a few more things that she could do to build on that, that even when they're meeting or exceeding expectations according to our definitions on our evaluation summary form, we always have some room for opportunities. And in this particular case, it was a nice opportunity to discuss some of the things that we might do in a face-to-face class, but that sometimes we forget to do when teaching in the online Blackboard shell, and how we can use our strengths from a face-to-face setting and apply those within an on-the-ground Blackboard shell as well, or online Blackboard shell. And again, specifics, giving some suggestions, not saying just to do more things, but giving some suggestions and examples of what specifically could be done. All of this really helps when you get to the PGP as well. The more specific we are in the evaluation summary form, the more that just kind of transitions nicely into developing a PGP with a faculty member. And what I find is usually after having the conversation with a faculty member and I ask them what they would like their goals to be, what they want to focus on the PGP, if I've worded the evaluation correctly and in a way that encourages them to be on board with this process, they'll start picking out the things that I hope they picked out. And so that usually is a good indicator of that the language was okay. Learning facilitation for this particular one is an example of where I couldn't really balance out strengths and opportunities. And because I had a little bit different view of going through the whole class, and you just saw kind of abbreviated notes, so I had a little more information to work with. There were some significant opportunities. And again, this linked back to the planning and preparation. Because she added nothing to the class, except for replies to student discussion questions, she didn't really have the opportunity to really push learning where she needed to be. And a lot of you put kind of question marks, not sure, and a lot of the things were key there that came up in the comments was there really wasn't a whole lot of formative feedback that could be better. And so giving some specific examples and opportunities on how she could increase learning facilitation by what she does in the discussion board as well as how she gives feedback, right? So those were the ratings. So wrapping up, we've done a lot today. We looked at the challenges and pitfalls and how we can easily be biased or inaccurate in our ratings, even when we're not intending to, by comparing faculty, by being too strict, too lenient. We always want to keep those goals and purposes of the evaluation in mind that were set up when we did our, that are in that initial FG&E training binder that we all got. That the focus really is on coaching and development and continuous growth. It's not just an evaluation for evaluation's sake to satisfy, human resources. That the goal is to build that relationship, foster the relationship, give the faculty the information they need, and really help them become better teachers. And then we focus a lot on choosing words carefully, being precise, prioritize for conciseness, knowing that we also have to be specific and detailed, and trying to be evidence-based and avoiding that vague language and that sort of thing. And then we did a couple examples. So, and we appreciate your interaction with those examples for sure. But to be mindful of time and for questions that may come up, what are some questions and thoughts and comments you have? What are some challenges that maybe we didn't talk about today that we could talk about while we have time left? And feel free to chat, or now that we're at the end as well, you could comment.
Well, thank you for that. Thank you, Lisa.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Thank you for the comments. There's a lot of just like when we do an evaluation, there was a lot of information to include in the presentation.
Mm-hmm. There's been a discussion about aligning. I didn't read that one.
Let me see if I can get my screen.
Has there been any discussion about aligning the student evaluation of faculty to our evaluation?
There is a discussion. There is a component on the evaluation summary form that talks about student evaluation. And our suggestion for this one, when we talk about summarizing the evaluation, is if this is the first time the teacher has taught the class, then we'll look at that. But if the teacher has taught the class previously, we want to take a combination of them all. We want to look for consistency, improvement, and then talk about room for growth. Just not taking one snapshot, as we talked about earlier. Sometimes you may have that one challenging class, and it's reflective in the student evaluation. So we want to look at all of them before we put that on the summary report.
To add to that, Teresa, for Kim's comment on aligning the student evaluation of faculty, is it would be interesting, and I think I might do this myself, is to go through the questions that the students answer on their evaluation of faculty. I know like the list I get is like there's 21 questions, and then and just noting, like I did in my notes where I try to say the announcements relate to planning and prep and those sort of things, I bet I could go down that student evaluation of faculty and start identifying what categories. Does the instructor allow for, my engagement in the learning process, right? I could tie that to learning environment and learning facilitation. Or, does the instructor get feedback returned promptly and give me feedback I can use? I could tie that to learning facilitation. So I think that's a good question, Kim. I don't know of anything formally that's being done, but it would be an interesting exercise for us to do for sure.
Joanna, this is Lisa. Oops.
Hi, Lisa.
I was just going to say that actually Chris Schramm has done a lot of work in terms of looking at our student evaluation and looking at that in terms of how they're tied back to the faculty growth and evaluation. Did some analysis in terms of which ones are tightly associated with the questions that we ask and our focus.
Right. Yep.
And so I am actually, we're moving towards that, so you can have multiple data points to be able to corroborate your observation, your evaluation with what the students are saying.
Right.
And so I think that's to come in conversation across all of our campuses in this next year still.
Yeah, definitely. Well, because the FG&E process is continuously improving on our side as well, right, from the administration type side. So I think that's a good point. And Charles had a question too. As an instructor who does not meet at risk of being fired. So I will say it depends, right? That to me, because the process was new, and I know we've been doing it now for 2 years, but people are still getting their first evaluations, right? With all the faculty we have, some people are getting their first evaluations. For me personally, I take the first evaluation I do with a faculty member as a starting point. I have had faculty member who do not meet in multiple categories who are still teaching for me, and I do present it that way. I let them know I don't always expect people to be meeting expectations. Just similarly with the example I gave. The instructor was not meeting expectations because she didn't know she was supposed to be doing something. So I take that first evaluation as a starting point. And then it's what happens after that determines whether they would still get teaching contracts. If I look in her class and she has not done anything working toward her PGP or anything to fill in those gaps we've identified, then it's a whole different conversation, I think, at that point. But for first evals, I take it as a starting point. So even if they're not meeting, we talk about what maybe needs to be addressed right away and what maybe are some things they can incorporate over the next few quarters, and then we talk again. So very good. So I know that we got a little bit, we had a little bit of a late start with a few technical things, but just to be mindful of time, I want to make sure we you know, wrap up, and if people have a couple additional questions, they can stay on. But I thank you all for attending today. It was a nice turnout, and I truly appreciate the feedback and the comments everyone gave, as I'm sure Teresa does as well.
Yes, I do. Thank you.